This is the story of a decade-long love triangle that spanned 4 of the biggest British bands of the 90s. Blur, Suede, Oasis, and of course the band fronted by the woman right at the heart of it all, Elastica. Our story begins in 1988 when a striking young man called Brett Anderson met a striking young woman called Justine Frischmann at University College London. The first words Brett spoke to Justine were hardly the stuff of romance. "What's wrong with your mouth?" he asked, thinking she had a speech impediment.
I remember seeing Brett the day that we were all signing in for our student IDs at UCL. He had sort of a long flick and he had a pair of earrings and he had a handbag. I mean, it was a lady's handbag. And I had this moment of thinking, is that a boy or a girl? And just finding him devastatingly attractive. But I just knew that we were going to be together.
There was this sort of weird little provincial twig.
I was like a trip somewhere and I made him sandwiches. You're just so incredibly awkward at that age. You have no idea what to say or how to socialise. One of you makes the sign that you actually are interested in, and for us that was me bringing him a sandwich.
And so, after Justine made sandwiches for Brett on a field trip to Milton Keynes, they became a couple. And the next year, 1989, Brett, his best friend Matt Osman, and Justine discovered that not only were they all musical, but they actually sounded pretty good when they jammed together. And the idea was floated of trying to get somewhere as a band. They advertised in the papers, recruited 19-year-old guitarist Bernard Butler, and named themselves Suede, with drummer Simon Gilbert joining shortly after. And while Brett was happy in his relationship with Justine, she was increasingly picturing a future that to her just looked a bit tame and unadventurous. Justine said nothing was happening with the band. It was becoming increasingly obvious that we were both going to fail third year at college because we weren't very interested. And I remember Brett saying, "It'll be really great when we've finished here and you get a job at an architect's and I stay home and do the hoovering and make dinner for you when you get home." I had this vision of me working and Brett being at home with a pinny on, cooking vegetarian pizza, and I just thought, I can't let this happen. This isn't working. If you could put the end of a relationship down to one comment, that was it. Another band making waves in the background was Blur. They'd signed to Food Records in March 1990, been on tour, and had their debut single reach number 48 in the UK singles charts. And when Blur performed at the Zap Club in Brighton, Suede were booked to be their support act. And it would be there that Blur frontman Damon Albarn first properly met Suede guitarist Justine Frischmann. Justine said, "I asked Damon for a Blur poster, and he was really rude, saying, 'F***ing buy it then.' And I remember him coming down and lecturing us, saying, 'We've got the biggest dressing room and you've got the little one, but you have to pay your dues.' Just being a real arsehole. However, his belligerence belied the fact that, as he watched Suede play, he could not take his eyes off their second guitar player. After that, he took it upon himself to track me down," says Frischmann. "He phoned up on the basis of offering us a gig, and he announced that I was the one, and we would be married and I had no choice in the matter. I was fairly bowled over. No one had done that to me before. He was really cute then, enormous blue eyes." In a time when Justine was kind of picturing a future for herself that was just a bit weak and a bit depressing, in bowled Damon Albarn like a wild man, kind of behaving like the polar opposite to Brett really. And the timing was just right, and he won her over.
Damon really tracked me down. He saw us play and he liked me, and he tracked me down. Like, he came and found me. I think I was 20 when I met Damon, and you know, at that age you're so cavalier with love. Brett and I weren't working for various reasons. Yeah, I somewhat got swept off my feet, I must admit it.
And so, in February 1991, Justine left Brett for Damon.
We were in this weird and horrible situation that Brett and Justine had split up and she'd met someone else, but she was still in the band.
I don't know how many months it was, but it was pretty awful, and just this heavy feeling in rehearsals, and you know, Brett was really having a hard time.
To lose a relationship that's not just your lover, but someone you're working with, someone who you're making art with.
At the time it was very painful, but it was possibly the best thing that ever happened to me.
On the 15th of April 1991, Blur released their second single, There's No Other Way, and entered the UK top 10 for the first time. They were officially pop stars, being featured in music magazines and making TV appearances. Suede, however, remained unsigned. Justine was still in the band whilst also dating Damon, but she would not be able to keep one foot in both camps for much longer. Suede guitarist Bernard Butler says, she started going on about Damon all the time while Brett was there, which I thought was really insensitive. She'd turn up late for rehearsals and say the worst thing in the world. I've been on a Blur video shoot. That was when it ended, really. I think it was the day after that that Brett phoned me up and said, I've kicked her out. Brett Anderson was, naturally, profoundly impacted by what Damon Albarn did, and Damon himself would go on to say in 1994 that he viewed pretty much every song on the first Suede album as having been written about either himself or Justine.
There were various rumours flying around that, for instance, the song Animal Lover was written about you.
There's no doubt that the majority of the songs on that first album are about either Justine or me. I mean, no question. I mean, I was sort of around when they were written, when Justine was still in the band. I used to go to a gig and it was very embarrassing. But in his defence, he was definitely singing about real things. I mean, you know, I think he's the genuine article. It's just, it was difficult for me personally because I could only see it as a sort of bitter boyfriend with a bit of a vendetta.
In February 1992, Suede got signed, and from that point on were all of a sudden on the cover of every magazine as the hype machine moved swiftly into fifth gear. Blur, however, were really struggling at this time, and things kind of came to a head between them and Suede when both bands were on the same bill at a charity gig.
Blur were trying to get their act together, and by the time they came to do their set, they were definitely sort of like a couple of drinks in, and it wasn't their best show. It was pretty rum, and Suede came on, and they might have been headlining, and they were just superb. You couldn't have had a more different clash between the two bands, and I think that was definitely, it was certainly the lowest point for Blur, and they had, I think a lot of people thought, well, that's it, they're never coming back. And Suede just went interstellar.
Next, Justine formed her band, Elastica, in the autumn of 1992. And with Damon's help, they also began getting established on the London scene. The song Never Here from Elastica's debut album would apparently be written about her previous relationship with Brett Anderson. But the tables were about to turn again for Blur and Suede, because in 1994, Blur released the brilliant Park Life, an album all about Britishness in a world which was, back then, flooded with America-centric music. That album exploded, giving them their first #1 in the UK album charts, and seeing them sweep the board at the Brit Awards that year. And as the sun finally rose over Blur, it appeared to be setting on Suede, because their guitarist, a central member of the band, Bernard Butler, left the band midway through recording their second album. And of course, a triumphant Damon took to the press to gloat about finally having beaten Suede. In 1994, he was quoted in a French magazine as follows: "I knew that my moment for vengeance would come, public vengeance and personal vengeance. I wanted to prove to myself that I could dethrone Brett and his group of cretins." But in 1994, that wasn't all he did to stick the boot into Suede and Brett. At this time, Brett Anderson was using heroin, and in November 1994, Damon also chose to announce this in the press and criticise him for it. "I think heroin is shit," he said, "and I know for a fact that Brett is doing heroin and he is a fucking idiot. From Damon to Brett, you're a twat for doing that. Get a life." And at this time, the Blur frontman seemed to have a kind of slightly unusual, dysfunctional relationship with almost everyone, his own girlfriend included. Damon and Justine's relationship was not a normal one in almost any sense of the word. They both fronted bands that were becoming very popular, and both had an army of admirers of the opposite sex. They also, in a very London-centric way, considered themselves very sort of modern and enlightened, which, in practice, just meant, according to this article at least, that they were wildly promiscuous. Blur's Damon Albarn has confessed that he and pop girlfriend Justine Frischmann regularly cheat on each other with groupies. The couple then discuss the sleazy details of their sexual conquests with each other. Damon, who shares a £350,000 house in London's Notting Hill with his live-in lover Justine, admits temptation on tour has proved too much. He is currently enjoying a holiday by himself in Iceland. Damon told NME magazine, "Neither of us are angels. We've both slept with other people, and we can talk about it. We had quite an unusual relationship," says Frischmann. "We saw ourselves as being quite modern, and not affected by the same rules as everyone else. The open thing does nothing for me, but there was no choice. If you're with Damon, you're going to be in an open relationship." In the Mirror article there, we got a reference to Damon Albarn spending time in Iceland. Apparently, he went there a lot, and it wasn't just to go sightseeing. Damon's bedding of groupies in Iceland had apparently got so out of hand and become so proverbial that this sketch went out on Icelandic TV.
Og hvað á barnið að heita?
Damon Thor Damonsson.
Damon Máni Damonsson.
Takk. Þorkell Blur Damonsson. Blurhildur Damonsson.
But there was one particular hookup that would have ripples in the life and career of Damon Albarn that would continue spreading out for years and years. In 1994, the same year that Parklife had been released, another new British band was also on the rise, this time from Manchester. They were called Oasis.
Blur's publisher, EMI and Elastica's publisher, gave us this tape and said, it's the next big thing. And me and Damon had listened to it and we were just like, this is rubbish. It was cigarettes and alcohol. And I was like, it just sounds baggy. It's rubbish. And Damon, as usual, kind of hating anything that could possibly be threatening in any way, was just like, yeah, it's shit and stuff. And we called up Michael, like, it's rubbish, don't sign it.
And at some point, end of 1994, beginning of 1995, frontman of Oasis Liam Gallagher was romantically linked to pop singer Lisa Moorish. And it was also around that time that Damon Albarn, already in a long-term relationship with Justine Frischmann, slept with Lisa Moorish. And really, that hookup was the touch paper that set off the most famous of 90s British band feuds, Oasis versus Blur. The Battle of Britpop would follow, in which Oasis's Roll With It went up against Blur's Country House, and Blur won. And Blur, Damon in particular, would really rub it in, gloating horribly and trolling Oasis for months afterwards. But the tide would soon turn against Blur and in favour of Oasis, because shortly after, Oasis released this. What's the Story Morning Glory, their crowning achievement, which went up against Blur's album The Great Escape, which was, let's be fair to them, shit. And this time, when the tables turned and Damon was no longer on top, Oasis did not respond with any level of dignified restraint like Brett Anderson.
I'd like to thank all the people. All the people. So many people.
This time round, Damon got an absolutely unrelenting and savage beatdown from Oasis that went on and on for years, with them basically gleefully dancing on his grave in front of the entire nation.
You were suddenly Blur with a sort of inauthentic middle class, and Oasis with a real gritty working class heroes. How did you feel? I mean, that whole time...
How did I feel? I felt stupid, and I felt very confused. Basically, didn't really realise that my kind of flippancy was going to have such profound sort of resonance in my life. And I changed quite dramatically after that period.
Oasis retaliated so hard that they made Damon and Blur, for just a little while, an absolute laughingstock. To the point that Damon would get verbally abused by the public just for walking down the street.
Because you were saying to me last time we met that when you were, just walking around in the street, you were getting heckled.
Yeah, it was quite a bit unnerving on occasions. I mean, everywhere I went, I'd be reminded of it.
And Liam, presumably smarting from the incident with Lisa Moorish, also decided to make a play for Justine.
There was a lot of press recently about you saying that you fancied Justine, Damon's girlfriend. Is it true?
Yeah.
Do you think that'll wind Damon up?
Yeah.
Why?
Because he'll say it won't and that, but deep down it will.
Do you think she fancies you then?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I just think she does.
But weren't you really horrible to her?
Yeah. And I shouldn't have been, and I'm sorry.
Nothing ever actually came of it though, and I suspect it was not particularly sincere, nor was it probably helped by the fact that Noel Gallagher was also simultaneously openly ridiculing Justine and her music on the radio.
I'll tell you a funny thing about her from Elastica. What's her name? John. She was in, what was it, The Face going, Wonderwall was totally emotionless and the guitar work was really uninspiring. Justine, have you heard any of your records lately? Because let me tell you, uninspiring does not even come into it. It's beyond uninspiring.
And of course, while Blur seemed to be tanking, as happened continually throughout their intertwined careers, Suede were once again newly resurgent, with their 1996 release Coming Up, which hit number 1, 5 songs from which were all released as singles and all entered the UK top 10. In retrospect, Justine and Albarn had started to separate during 1995, when their bond tended to be maintained via phone conversations.
Do you get to see much of each other?
Not at the moment, actually. I haven't seen him properly for quite a while. And basically we're not in the country at the same point until about December.
Worse still, upon her return from Elastica's year-long world tour, Frischmann found that their respective visions of the future were very different indeed, saying, "Damon was saying to me, you've given me a run for my money, you've proved that you're just as good as I am. You've had a hit in America, now settle down and let's have kids." He wanted me to stop being in a group, stop touring and have children. I wasn't very happy, and he kept saying the reason you're unhappy is because you really want children but you don't know it. It did throw me. I thought about it quite seriously.
All our arguments are over music, always. Where he'll play me something and I just say, I hate that, And he'll go into a mad rage and say to me, why do you hate it? And then I just think, oh no, why did I say? But you've got to be honest, because otherwise there's no point.
Blur were on tour, performing in support of an album, the eponymous Blur, that would turn out to be their biggest worldwide selling record to date. Frischmann, meanwhile, was at home, bedevilled by drug-related inertia and the travails of Elastica. With Albarn once again absent, she decided to re-establish contact with someone whose company she had not shared for the best part of 6 years, Brett Anderson.
I had this weird dream that Brett had died. I dreamt that I was at his funeral. And when I woke up, I was like, I have to get in touch with Brett, and I hadn't really been in touch with him for years.
And it was almost like two different people meeting. Because when we first met, we were two sort of scruffy students and no one knew who we were. And then we'd sort of gone off and done things independently and then kind of met as completely different people.
I think he knew me before when I was a 17-year-old twerp. We just had more history. I was trying to remember who I was at the beginning of it or something.
Justine even got back on stage with Suede, by way of kind of closing the chapter and burying the hatchet.
I think it was like sort of exercising a few ghosts. Suddenly we were just having fun together and she was jumping on stage with us.
Justine soon realised she had to make some changes in her life. What had been envisioned as some super modern, open relationship had, of course, just turned out to be predictably unhealthy. she needed to get free, and she needed to get clean. Despite Frischmann's evident belief that he should leave, Albarn refused to say die. She says, "I kept saying I wanted him out, and he kept telling me to go and lie down because I wasn't feeling well. And I wasn't. He'd put in too much time to walk away from it. He wanted children out of it. He wanted something I hadn't given him, and he was going to stick around till he got what he wanted. It took a long time to break up." Finally, after a last-ditch holiday at the end of 1997, Albarn and Frischmann went their separate ways.
You know, boys in bands are kind of trouble, they are.
What's the best remedy to heal from heartbreak?
The pain away.
I write all the good songs in that relationship. Or that ex-relationship. Good luck to her, but you know, it's like, you know, I live in a totally different world now, you know. I was deeply in love with Justine, but you know, that's people have relationships and they end. It's no big deal, you know.
And so began the process for both of them, of moving on and healing up.
You were sort of thrust into a situation where yourself and your previous boyfriend were all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a tough thing to deal with?
It was awkward because it was not really something that I'd ever felt that I'd courted. So it was kind of weird getting to that thing where there's like 40 Italian Blur fans camping outside your front door for an entire summer, and people from tabloids stealing our rubbish and stuff. And it just scared the shit out of me, really.
But probably the real moment at which this story and this chapter came to a close was when Damon released a song called Tender. A kind of lament, a song about processing, letting go, and grieving for the relationship that he had lost.
It was quite an odd thing hearing a song like Tender on the radio, you know, and I guess it was quite romantic, really. It was quite a romantic gesture.
Did you cry when you heard it?
I did a couple of times. I've admitted it now.
These days, Damon seems like a much nicer bloke. He's even buried the hatchet with Noel Gallagher, having met him for a pint and then appeared on stage with him. And in a particularly poetic touch, the song that the two of them played together was Tender, a song that Noel praised in the press. And not just a really good song, but also the song that really marked the end of the most tempestuous rock and roll love triangle in the UK in the 1990s. A massive thank you, as always, to all my supporters on Patreon. The next Patreon exclusive video will be part 2 of my ongoing interviews and research into the rare Oasis song, Who Put the Weight of the World on My Shoulders. So keep an eye out for that one, and if you would like access to exclusive bonus material and to be credited at the end of videos, the link is down in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Do let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, I'll see you next time.